everyone. Welcome to the On Air with Alumni segment. Today we have with us Aby Joseph. He's an optical engineer and scientist at Apple in the camera hardware team. His expertise lies in the optical design, computational imaging, and image data analysis. He's co-inventor of 2 US patents and author of 5 reviewed publications with 111 citations. He's a public speaker and an astrophotographer. So he completed his B.Tech in engineering physics from IIT Delhi. He went on to pursue PhD in optics from University of Rochester and is currently working as an optical engineer at Apple. So welcome, Aby. We're really glad to have you on board.
Thank you so much. I was unmuted.
Okay, so let's get started. So the first question we have is, did you choose engineering physics or did it choose you? And if so, how did engineering physics at IIT Delhi keep your interests alive?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question to start with. So I think for me personally, my journey has been that I think 1 week after I gave my JEE, long before the results were announced, I was very curious about what kind of fields there are to pursue after schooling. And I think my mom had pointed out that there's an open house happening in IIT Delhi. So I lived in Delhi. And it was a great opportunity to just go and chat with some current students and find out more about fields. And specifically, this was an open house in the physics department. So I went there and interacted with students. I think a lot of third-year engineering physics students had put up their projects, both like working models or posters of what they were doing, and it was amazing. I'd never heard of such a field. It was still relatively new then, at that time. And it was really nice talking to the students, one-on-one. They were also B.Tech students. And I always loved physics. And, just this idea of a branch which kind of straddled between both basic science and engineering really caught my attention. I always wanted to do something a little bit different from this otherwise mad rush towards some more or rather you only tend to hear about like certain older engineering fields which have their own merits. It's always nice to try and do something which is in a little bit more of a niche. So yeah, that's how I ended up choosing that branch.
Yeah, certainly amazing. You had an informed decision, let's keep it that way. And how did EP at IITD keep your interests alive?
Sure. So I think especially at IIT Delhi, the physics and optics department has a long history of contributing a lot to the field, especially in optics. There are some standard textbooks now which came out from the physics department. They're like Ajay Ghatak and Professor Tyagarajan's books, and a lot of other professors who've done a lot of work in optical engineering, especially. So I think for me, especially since I went on to pursue a PhD in optics, it was really nice to go through that program. And there's for people who are interested in other physics aspects, there are also people who are interested, for example, in quantum physics or fiber optics or other such fields. It was a program which blended both physics and electrical engineering when required. So I think it gave like a good starting point for a few different fields of study like that.
Great. So yeah, like all you mentioned about it shows you have a great passion for physics, and that took you to US. So how did you arrive at this decision to pursue a PhD?
Yeah, so it was clearly not a straightforward path. It was not something I was considering easily, like for the first 2.5 years that I spent in IITD. I would say it was a process, and one of the things that helped me was an internship I did at the end of my third year, where I got the opportunity to spend 3 months in a national laboratory in Indore called the Center for Advanced Technology. And I got to experience firsthand what it feels like to be a researcher on the field, like working with these very advanced equipment, and doing your own small part in trying to make sense of the data that's being collected, and really see what the life of a scientist looks like, which you may not always get to see in a university setting. So I guess that was what really drove me into doing a PhD.
Okay, so thank you. Now moving on to the next question. So you did an X-ray optics intern. So that suggests that you have been in this domain for long. Do you think internships and projects like this play a big role in your application?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, they do help a lot, and I would strongly encourage, like, most of your audience, like students who are currently going through their bachelor's program at IIT Delhi, to always keep an eye out for internships outside, which are always great because they show breadth of experience, where you show that you either went to a different institute or even a different country to gain some additional experience. But even if that's not something that's possible, do look out for opportunities to perform research during a summer at IITD itself. There's so many amazing labs there, and so many interesting projects going on. It's always good to explore different fields and make use of those, especially those summers that we have. So yeah, it does play a huge impact on your application for PhD in the future. You usually want to tell a story, and it's only when you have dabbled enough in like different types of projects and internships that you can then string together the relevant parts and kind of make a story depending on what kind of program you're applying to. So yeah, I think it's quite important.
Okay, yeah. So great. So one thing for you, it was quite clear from the start is you did love physics and you were sort of pursuing things around it mostly. But for many people, what happens is they discover about their true interests late, by the time when they do not have any major internships or projects associated with it. So do you think this hampers one's application, and what should they do about it? Like if they discover it a bit late?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my short answer would be I don't think it hampers you in any way, because there's a little bit of difference between the actual path that you go through as you develop as a professional during a bachelor's, and what you present in a PhD application specifically. I think it's very important to actually explore different types of internships or projects. See what you're interested in. The whole point of doing an internship is to see if it's a good fit, and sometimes the answer could be it's not a good fit, and that's not a bad thing by any means. In fact, as I mentioned before, when you write a statement of purpose for admissions to a PhD program, you try and string together the relevant portions of your experience, but at the same time you can always portray other internships or other projects you've had that may not be directly connected to the field of study in a way that shows that, hey, I did this and this is what I learned. These are the soft skills, the transferable skills that I learned, whether it's project management or how to present your work, which is always important. So no, I don't think it hampers you at all. And I remember in my time, we used to get stressed or tensed about not necessarily having enough, relevant projects or internships. But I think if you just look at what skills you've gained, which may not always be specific technical skills, I think that helps you put up a good application.
Okay, yeah. So you make a story and you connect the dot yourselves and you just present it to them. Oh, I dabbled here and there, and this is what I love in the end, and I want to press it. Great. So, okay, so moving to your preparation, let's talk about the amazing GRE score you have, specifically the 990 or 990 in the physics test. So can you shed some light on the purpose of the GRE physics test and its relevance to your application or tests like this in general, which can help out?
Sure. Yeah. So the GRE, at least in my time, there used to be two flavors. There's the GRE general test, that's the aptitude and verbal tests that most of us give. And then there were the subject tests. I think specifically for University of Rochester and the optics PhD program, the subject test was optional. I think it kind of helps put a cherry on top of your application when you can show in another way different from your grades that you are competent technically in your field. But I think it was also kept optional for the reason that it's not necessarily a determining aspect of your application. But anything you can add to strengthen that application helps. I would also like to touch upon the general GRE test. I think sometimes it's made out to be perhaps like more important or significant in your application than it actually is. I know there is debate about how relevant that test is or how good it is at judging a student's aptitude or performance for graduate studies. So I think there's a reason that more and more universities are making it optional. So my suggestion would be that prepare well for the test. It's always good to improve your vocabulary and your comprehension skills. which is usually what a lot of students in IIT Delhi, may have trouble with. Like the quant section, like everyone does very well. But at the same time, don't get hung up on the scores. You just have to pass a certain threshold in the general GRE, and as long as you've done that, you're good. And if you do very well, it's an added feather on your cap. But by no means is it a huge criterion for deciding admissions. It's more about your project experience, your internships, and really a statement of purpose, because that's your place where you try and show who you are. Whereas a CV or resume is like very two-dimensional. It's very limited in showing who you are as a human being. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure that's really helpful and beneficial for a lot of us. Okay, so you made into University of Rochester. So that's really great. Could you briefly describe the process of narrowing down your choices into the final university?
Sure. Yeah, I think what helped me most there, and this is another advice I'd give for students, B.Tech students, is it really, one of the things that helped me decide on the university is conversations over a long period of time, like almost 2 years, with a lot of senior students, definitely from the same branch itself, who had gone on for further studies, or knew other students who were more senior, who had gone previously. And really try and understand which universities are known for specific fields. I think a bad way of trying to choose a university program is, open up QS World University Rankings and just literally go down the list and start applying. This. Like that's not a good way. Those rankings are often very not very meaningful. So I also talked to a lot of professors in my department, and that's where I learned that University of Rochester is really good in optics. It's like the place to go to, whereas you may not necessarily have heard about the university in other fields. So that really helps, especially when it comes to a PhD, which even unlike a master's, like it's really important to find a good lab, and the label per se of the university itself doesn't matter as much. So yeah, to sum it up, talk to people. It's always great. And you learn a lot, and that's the beauty of being in a place like IIT Delhi. You have all this wealth of information that people who are more senior to you have, and always those conversations in the hallways and hostels while you're having that amazing food in the mess really helps. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can ask more people to connect with you as well. Being
oh yeah, sure. Always happy to. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on, so choosing a mentor is an excruciating task and a crucial one, as it decides major aspects of your PhD. So how did you go about it, and what would you say are the effects of this decision?
Yeah, I'm very glad you asked me that. So I think it's a very important decision that you make. So a PhD is long. It can be, whether if you do it in Europe, it's about 4 years. In the US, it can take about 5 to 6 years. And it's you are pretty much in that lab with that advisor for a long time. So it really matters to have a rapport with that person. And I've always said this, like someone may be a great scientist, but they may not necessarily be a good advisor. So it really helps when you're trying to decide a lab, whether it's during your application stage, where sometimes you have to mention a person's name, or if you're lucky, you can actually go to the university and take a few months to decide a lab. Do reach out to the students who are currently working in that lab, like senior PhD students, have a coffee with them, chat with them outside the lab, and then really see what the environment in that lab is like, what the dynamics between the PhD advisor and the students is like. And you really get to know a lot of, get a lot of insight into how it really feels like working there. So don't be just, enamored by, how famous a lab is, or how good the research coming out of a lab is. Like really look at the interpersonal dynamics. And I was very lucky to work in a lab that was very friendly and had some amazing advisors during my PhD. So yeah, I would say that's very important, and just go with your gut and see if you really connect with the person you're talking
to. Yeah, great. Thank you. So moving on to the next one. So yeah, let's talk about your PhD experience in Rochester. I'm sure it must have been amazing.
Sure. Yeah. So my PhD, for those of you who are wondering, was in optics. What does that mean? So optics is any study of light. I would say it's a sub branch of applied physics. Specifically, I worked on biomedical imaging. So I worked on an imaging system that was in a research stage to take high resolution pictures of the retina in living human beings, and using a bunch of optics and a technology called adaptive optics, which was initially developed in astronomy and was later applied to medical imaging. So one of the interesting parts of my PhD was my advisor was not a physicist; he was a neuroscientist, and he was interested in looking at the progression of diabetes and how we can use advanced technology to image the tiny blood cells at the back of our eye. Look at how they're moving, look at the speeds at which they're moving, and try and see if you can detect diabetes earlier in a person, which currently is very difficult. Right now, you can only detect such diseases when it's already, very at a very late stage. So the idea was to use high resolution imaging to really zoom in to the retina of a living person, and actually with high speed photography, image individual red and white blood cells as they pass through capillaries in the eye. So I worked about 50% in hardware engineering, where I looked at how to design and build these large optical imaging systems, and about the other 50% working with like some image processing and MATLAB. So it was really a lot of fun, because a lot of my background is in physics and optics, but I have zero background in biology. But I had to teach myself a lot about how the human eye works, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, that was like the technical or professional side of my PhD. But I would say the other major aspect, just like life in IITD, was the friends I made. I was very active in the student community there. I met my future wife in Rochester, like in my second year. I knew her like through most of my PhD. So I guess that was probably the best part about my time in Rochester. But yeah.
That's great, great.
Mhm.
So yeah, this question, I think it's leading up to, has Rochester been kind to you? I mean, 6 years, I'm sure you must have fallen in love with the city, hopefully. So was the funding enough to get you through? Was the cold too much to make it through? And other bittersweet experiences which can help us take better decisions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think as you allude to, a PhD can be hard. It's long, and the winters in Rochester were pretty long as well. I think it was a very formative experience for sure. There were times which were difficult, but what really helped is again having a student community there that was very strong. There were fellow students who were also going through the PhD program who were going through a lot of the similar struggles. So it really helped to be very active outside of the lab in simple things like organizing cultural events, or like just organizing events even in the community where you were living. So I think that was a huge respite from the labor that a PhD actually is. I think the city is amazing, and it was very kind, and I really got into a lot of uh, I got into watching plays in theaters. They had student discounts. So I would love, going and like actually experiencing these plays, which was like a first time experience for me. It's Rochester is a very, very cold place. So it was fun dabbling in some, winter snow activities like sledding or skiing, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you also talk about, was the funding good enough, or some extra things that
Oh
you
yeah,
did?
definitely. Yeah, I think that's a very important point. So for those of you, those in the audience who may not know, so usually PhD programs in the US are fully funded, which means that they completely pay your tuition, and they will also give you a stipend that's more than enough to help you, be completely financially independent. So I guess that's a really important point, because as opposed to doing a master's degree in the US, it's very different. Like you'll get some scholarship, but it's usually very expensive and involves a lot of money for tuition. In a PhD, it's like almost zero tuition that you pay, especially in STEM fields. So yes, the funding is supposed to last for your entire program. It depends now a little bit into what kind of department or university you're going into. I was very fortunate to be part of a department which is very well funded, and I never had any funding issues. But there have been departments or labs which sometimes run into funding issues, and there are scenarios where a PhD program may be cut short a little bit just because the professor ran out of funding. So that is a very real thing. I think if you're very talented and you get into a good program, you usually don't have to worry about that. I don't think a lot of students, especially at IITD, would uh, may face that. But at the same time, sometimes there are factors outside of your control. In academia, especially, research grants run out. So I think it's good to, and this circles back to the question you asked about choosing a lab. One of the things you learn when you chat with these senior students is how risky, it may be to, like, how risky a certain lab may be. Is that lab good in terms of, does it have a constant flow of funding, which usually means that you don't have to worry about the PhD being cut short.
Yeah, so I'm sure this was insightful for many of us. Okay, so summing it up, I think Rochester has been kind. And like you said, it's a nightmare even for the worst Game of Thrones character. I think you tweeted about this or something. But yeah, you made it out really well. So moving on. So did you at any point doubt a decision? Maybe when you see your peers doing all sort of different things in those 5 years, or when professors gave you a hard time, anything like that?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. Yes, I did several times doubt, uh, my decision to start a PhD. I guess especially in the earlier phases, when you can be in a situation where you're trying different projects and sometimes things are not working, and I, I think it's very natural to have doubt creep in, and sometimes you really have to introspect. I have friends who have entered a PhD program and decided perhaps after 2 years that this is not for them, and did very well, when they decided to, like, take a master's and go on to industry. So I think it's always useful to introspect about what you're doing in your career choices. For me personally, even though I had doubts, I think it was more of the nature where I was still maturing as a scientist, and momentary failures in, say, experiments you're doing or research projects you're doing were more part of the game, at least in the personal experience that I had. So for me, I was fortunate enough that I was actually able to complete the whole program, and it was a very enriching experience. And I was, I don't regret it at all. But I would emphasize that it's not a failure to decide at some point if it's not something you want to do. At least in US universities, you always have the option of trying to get a master's and move on to an industry position, for example. I think for me personally, what I enjoyed about my decision to stick to it is that it gave me a chance, like in my early 20s, to really develop and take my time to understand a field and dive deep into it, and really learn how to what knowledge creation looks like. Like, what does that process look like? We've had millennia of evolution, and we've come up with this way of what we call the scientific method, and how we come up with a hypothesis, create a design an experiment to test that hypothesis, and then how we tell that to the world, by which I mean the process of publishing a paper, going through peer review, and also peer reviewing other articles. I think that was a very formative experience, because that's like the pinnacle of our civilization, is how we test methodically any scientific theory or paradigm. So for me, it was great, and I ended up coming to industry, and I've been able to use some of those skills here as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was certainly really well put. Yeah. So moving on, Will. So can you shed some light on your journey to Apple?
Sure. Yeah. So I joined Apple. It's been almost a year now, and I'm working as an optical engineer here in the camera team. My journey here has been, it's been quite amazing. So towards the end of my PhD, I did an internship at Facebook Reality Labs, where I worked as a research intern on some of their R&D projects on eye tracking. And that was very helpful, because it gave me that breadth of experience of having worked in an industry setting, which really helps when you're trying to look for jobs, full-time positions. And I would say I had a wonderful internship experience there. And eventually, when I was looking for full-time positions, I wanted to be with a company which had a long history of producing hardware products, which were very successful, especially in optical engineering. So Apple is one of the biggest camera companies out there. Is one way to think about it. So yeah, that's been my journey here. Like my experience with optical imaging has been very helpful in the role that I play now, which is working with depth sensing cameras, specifically like LiDAR and Face ID on the iPhone products. And it's been a great ride till now, and looking forward to like a lot more years here.
Yeah, great. So it was like through your interns, you're exposed to things in the industry settings, and then that's how you went away to Apple. I mean, yeah. So moving on. So Apple's hardware products are as famous as the software, and the fantastic engineering team is to be credited for that. So can you share your experience at Apple from an optical engineer's perspective? This is something we get to hear really less often.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a great question because there's a lot of certainly a lot of great advice out there in terms of careers in software engineering. The buzzwords today are machine learning and data scientist, even though a lot of it's data engineering actually. I think especially in hardware engineering, it tends to be more of a niche, and students who are say from physics, optics, or electrical engineering or mechanical backgrounds may be interested in like some of the jobs that are out there in the industry where you can be a hardware engineer, where literally it means that you're effectively working on products that you can touch and feel, even though you may still be doing a lot of software modeling and design. So for example, at Apple itself, only a small fraction of its employees are actually work on hardware. Like in many industries out there, a lot of the engineers are software engineers. So it's been particularly nice because this company has a long history of producing some amazing products, and you get to work in that culture of how do you come up with such a product. And one of the surprises for me, at least, or one of the learnings for me, has been how it takes several iterations of product development, where you try things and they fail, and you try them again and you iterate, and you make small improvements over a period of time, which is how you actually get to a final product, which is what the public sees and can feel with their hands. So that has been quite formative in learning, how to think carefully about product design, and how to be ready to accept failure and to iterate, which is also kind of a good philosophy to like follow in any career or like in life in general. So yeah, that's how I guess I would describe my time at Apple.
Yeah, so it's really amazing to have a perspective from that side, as we do see a lot of few instances where we do get to know more about the hardware. Okay, yeah, so moving on. So Professor Rao, the previous IITD director, he commented on your LinkedIn post about how IIT Delhi is starting a new center for optics and photonics. So do you have any teaching plans in mind? And what would you say are the other options, various options available to people after PhD? Because sometimes it's believed to limit you in a certain way. So yeah, your take on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'd like to address the second question first, which is, I do remember even in my time when I was looking for places to do my PhD, there is this myth that you're kind of limited in terms of career options after a PhD. At least in the US, the PhD programs, a lot of PhD programs offer a great pathway if you want to do research and development in industry. There are a lot of really good job opportunities here, especially as an optical engineer. Like I'm here on the West Coast, and there are lots of opportunities here. So it doesn't limit you in that way, and it gives you that flexibility of whether you want to move on to academia afterwards or to industry. So I would certainly try and like dispel that myth that it limits your options. I think for me it has been an opportunity to really develop as an engineer and scientist, and move on to a kind of job where you can do a little bit of R&D and do also more product development or more product or work more on the product side of things. To the second question about the Optics and Photonics Center, I think it's great, like what IIT Delhi is doing. I think there are so many new fields that are coming up, and especially since IIT Delhi has this very rich history in optics of having contributed to the field. I think it's a move in the right direction, and I know there's a lot of hiring going on in that center. So yeah, for me personally, I, I, I don't think I currently have plans to go into academia, into teaching. But one of the things I've learned in my journey till now in the last 10 years is you think you know what you want to do, but it's only when you have these experiences that you really realize where you fit in. And that's why, to circle back to some of your questions, I always encourage, like, take advantage of these opportunities you get for projects and internships. You discover yourself through them.
Okay, yeah. So thank you. It was certainly really well put. It does help in breaking the myth away. So thank you. Now, moving on, we come to your IITD life. So how has IITD changed your life? So apart from the merits that the IITD degree adds, what other value it has added? So maybe your hostel life experiences. Anything
Sure. Yeah. Where to begin? Like, there's so many. Um, I think I'd like to start with perhaps one aspect that's not talked about perhaps as often. I think IIT Delhi has an amazing department for humanities and social sciences, which I personally found very helpful in my education during my time there. I explored courses all over the place, like in literature, English literature, and fiction, and in sociology, in policy making, and I think it was really important to me in my education as an engineer to really open up my mind to all these other fields and all of these other ways of methodically studying aspects of human development and human life that a purely science and engineering education may not always give you. So that was, like, one of my fond experiences, certainly that. And even today, when I look at my life outside of my professional career, and I look at books I read, or like audiobooks or podcasts I listen to, the foundation of that was laid during those discussions that I had in some of these courses that I did outside of my core engineering courses. So that was, I guess, the professional aspect of life at IITD. The other one, as you mentioned, I think a lot of this us feel this is the connections you make and the friendships you build during a life in a hostel. I think hostel life in IITD is very hard. It's a huge culture shock when you first enter the institute. We all come from such different backgrounds. I don't think we appreciate enough how we all come from a lot of different places in India, a lot of different cultures, languages. And there's a huge culture shock for some of us when we come into this like melting pot where we all like put together. I think in my time, they were running short of rooms. So they put like 3 students in a room that was meant for 2 students, and 2 students in a room that was meant for 1 student. And yeah, we were like literally very close to each other. So yeah, there are a lot of fun memories, some of which I can't repeat here. But yeah, I think hostel life and those connections you build certainly was one major part of life there.
Yeah, so we do have the similar system still going on, 3 people in the room. But yeah,
Yeah.
so talking about it, you can, so maybe you talked about how it has made you a bit independent and how it helped you in PhD. Can you talk more on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think certainly for me, and perhaps for a lot of students, unless you've been in a boarding school before, it's kind of the first time in your life where you're relatively independent, where you have to take care about a lot of aspects of your life. Simple things like doing laundry or fending for yourself for food if the food in the mess is not that great. And I think especially if you're considering doing a PhD, it's an added level of independence. Where of course it's true as well if you decide to pursue a job after your B.Tech and you have to move to a different city, you pretty much have to learn how to take care of yourself. Certainly, coming to a different country is there's an added layer of learning how to be independent. We move into a house which we have to bring up from scratch. Like it's an empty house, and you have to buy every single thing that the house requires. Learn how to cook if you didn't know already. Learn how to go and do grocery shopping, which are perhaps not some of the things that you do as a bachelor student in the IITD campus. So I think learning how to be independent has been a process, and it's been a lot of fun. You learn from your peers, you mimic and you follow the kind of advice they've been giving. And I think to circle back, those are kind of the fond memories you keep, where you really grow as an individual is when you go through these, some tough spots where you're forced to learn how to do something. Yep.
Yeah, so this answer is quite the sum of all. Yeah, it is just not the best place for just your academic from the academic point of view, but you do get a lot of things too. It's just an amazing ecosystem where you develop yourself into the better version of yourself every day. So yeah, now talking about your Facebook presence and your astronomy love, an amazing astrophotographer, I must say. So you seem like a versatile person. So connecting this with your extracurriculars at IITD, what were your hobbies back then? What were the clubs you were active in? So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's been a huge part of my life. Certainly, even in starting from school, I was quite involved in extracurriculars, specifically debating and writing, creative writing, or just writing in general. Even during my PhD, I was quite involved in the student community, in helping out organizing cultural events or like community events for games, etc. I think, I think it's important for me to share this in the hope that it helps students who are currently at IITD. I think when I came to IITD, certainly for the first 2 years, I was going through a hard time, especially from a mental health standpoint. Partly because of this huge, culture shock that you get when you come in. We were all geniuses, before we joined IITD, and it's a bit of a shock when you come into the space where everyone's smart, and all of a sudden you're an average student, and like how do you deal with that? How do you process that? And I dabbled a little bit in like EDLC, like the debating society, and a little bit in writing, where I would like write some blogs, but never did as much as I wanted to. It's early on, and I was also struggling a bit academically. And I guess the reason I mentioned this is, especially when I came into my PhD program, and I really dove back into, I would call it like the life outside of your lab, is when I realized that how helpful it is to have that peer structure to really help you through tough times. And if anything, the PhD was way harder than the B.Tech program, and it was, and I was happier, and only because I was really involved in like some of those aspects. So yeah, this is just a pitch to like it's always hard. Courses in IITD are no joke, but it really helps to be involved in a life outside of it, even if it seems at first like you're spending more time, you're losing sleep. It's very therapeutic to have that parallel life per se on campus.
That's a great take on that. And yeah, so we all like as IITians, we do want to do everything and everything amazing, but sometimes I think we cannot do all of it at once. But yeah,
Yep.
so I think as you already mentioned, that we must look out for more extracurricular activities, or get more involved. So again, adding to that, maybe any other message that you have for IITD students, for the student community?
Sure. I would say a message would be to be kind to yourself. The ages of 18 to 22, you're still developing as a human being. You're still developing in your professional life, and it's okay if things are not going, great, or at least by the metrics that people usually define great. Especially starting on. I think there's a lot to be said about trying to take care of yourself from a mental health standpoint. I think it's really great to see now that there's more acceptance, of therapy, or like or seeking help when required. But there is still, I think we live in a society where there's a lot of taboo about talking about such things. I still remember when I came in as a student during our student orientation, the institute's counselor had come up, and she was talking about how it's very sad that no one comes to her. Like, she gets to see all the students like on that first day, and then she never sees them for 4 years. And I'd like to mention here that when I did my internship at Facebook, the company offered all of its interns 25 free mental health sessions, which is kind of a sign of how these institutions, which are at the forefront of hiring the smartest people out there, really value people taking time for their mental health. So I guess I would emphasize a little bit, especially when you're still maturing as a person. and still developing a lot of your worldview as an individual. Like, take it easy, like be kind of, don't be too hard on yourself. Things don't always go according to plan. And I would also say, for example, therapy is seen as something you do as a last resort. When you're really struggling with something, or you're, say, clinically depressed. I think we are moving on to an acceptance of it being something that perhaps everyone should be doing, because when you talk to someone who is a professional therapist, you are in a safe space, and you're in a space where you won't be judged for what you're sharing. And I think, especially with uh, with some of the things you hear sometimes of people struggling and not being able to seek help when required. I would say that being making use of the resources you have in the institute to seek help when required, whether it be a professional counselor, or talking to someone about what you're struggling with, is really important. And perhaps also what is important is to look out for friends of yours who may be like shunning themselves, or shutting out everyone, to maybe try and see like what they're struggling with, and try and get help for them if possible.
Yeah, so it's really important that you spoke about mental health here, because I think that's one piece of advice we need to hear continuously, but we do not get to hear more often. It's all the other things that we're always hopping on. So that's great. Thank you so much for that. And this brings us to the end of the interview. This was quite a delightful interview. It was really pleasant. So it's those great insights packed into little pleasant packets all together, which gives you a nice time where you sit and you go, oh, that's what maybe I should also think about. So thank you so much, Aby, for doing this. It's been really great honor to have you on board, and we're really glad that you took out your time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. And thank you so much to you guys for organizing this, and putting up some really amazing questions. I think it made me relive some of my moments in IITD. And I'm as you mentioned, I'm always happy to if students have questions about applying for PhDs, it's PhD programs, I'm always happy to help out. I remember when I was in my third and fourth year, I used to really bug some senior students who had already gone on to PhD programs. I would send them copies of my statement of purpose, sometimes revisions of that, and say, hey, can you look at this revised version, suggest me anything. And please do reach out, and always happy to pass it on and help others.